Good evening, everyone. It is that Weems guy here yep, for another episode. We have a very special guest with us here tonight. Of course, all of our guests are special, so you should come to expect that by now. Sir, would you introduce yourself to the audience and tell them who you are and what you got here?
All right. I'm George Harris. I am the president and CEO of International Firearms Consultants, LLC. And I've been in the shooting and training business the bulk of my life, I suppose. I got started at the ripe old age of 3 when I watched my grandmother shoot a squirrel out of a tree with what I later found out to be a nickel-plated 22 caliber H&R revolver. And I thought, man, that is good juju. So as I got along in a few years, one of my uncles gave me a slingshot, and I figured that was a pretty good projectile launcher. So I commenced to killing the chickens and shooting the windows out of the house before I got my backside wore slap out. Learned not to do that anymore. And then came BB guns and all this other good stuff. So I grew up in a rural part of Virginia, and we hunted, with all kinds of things. Weren't particularly good at it, but that's what boys in the country do. So the next major event is it was December of 1969. I got this letter from the government, and it said, "Greetings. We need you to come and work with us a little bit, for a couple of years, as a matter of fact, in the military service." And I'm like, holy cow. So anyhow, I entered into basic training in January of 70 and went through infantry AIT. And I really kind of liked it because in infantry AIT, we got to shoot everything that was man portable. I mean, it was just a lot of fun. And machine guns. I mean, like it's the first time I'd ever shot machine guns. So that was good stuff. I got to shoot M14s and M16s, and I like the 16 better. The M14, I was kind of a smaller, let's say, about 140 pounds soaking wet, and the 16 was easy to shoot. So I graduated from AIT. Everybody, with the exception of 11 of us, went to Vietnam, and I got selected to go to small arms armorer school. So I just finished learning how to shoot these things. Now I got to learn how to fix them. So I was a pretty good mechanic anyway. So I took to that, like the proverbial duck to water, and did real good with that. And not too far after graduating from that school, and it was, again, a sequence of events that was just absolutely amazing. They needed trainers, and they needed drill sergeants because all the drill sergeants at that point in time were being moved out and going over to be platoon sergeants in Vietnam. So I graduated from drill sergeant school in June of 1972. And I'm like, wow. I couldn't even spell drill sergeant, 6 months ago. Now I are one, type of thing. So it was obvious that I knew something about firearms and I knew how to use them and all that. So I was the guy that got to teach BRM, basic rifle marksmanship, and I kind of liked that. And that started the learning process for me. In the Army, it's I talk, you listen, and then an explicative after that. And I saw some kids that just, couldn't get it. And I honestly, at that point in time, I wasn't smart enough to reach them. I didn't know what to do. I knew that they were having problems. They were jerking the trigger, closing their eyes, doing all the normal stuff. And they weren't qualifying, so they got recycled. And I felt bad about that. But again, I didn't know what to do about it at the time. So it was at that point I started to think, all right, so there's got to be a better way to do this. And, that's basically where I got started, and I'm, ended here today, and I'll continue tomorrow, looking for a better way to make behavioral change in other humans when it relates to firearms. So anyhow, along the way, I shot some competitions and I did well enough, and I got picked up on the various teams and all this other good stuff. And I had graduated from the Army to the Army Reserve at that point in time. And I shot competitive, the 2700 bullseye was the thing. So I wanted to, one of my goals was to become a distinguished pistol shot. And, it really doesn't make a lot of difference, but it's kind of a big deal, to the shooters at any rate. So I got distinguished with the pistol, and I took a sabbatical for a little while and did some other military stuff. And the rifle people needed somebody to, understood what to do with a muzzle and a trigger. So I got kind of drafted into, shooting the rifle. So I shot on the national pistol team, national rifle team, got distinguished with the rifle. And, at that point in time, Army wise, and I'm not sure how this, I don't think would apply to the civilian world. That's kind of like a different thing. But there were fewer double distinguished shooters than there were Medal of Honor recipients. And that's not to make any comparison whatsoever. I mean, the people that are the Medal of Honor recipients are the top of the notch from A to Z. You can't take anything away from them. But on the other hand, with all the people that attempt to get distinguished with either the rifle or the pistol, and can make it with both, that tells you that you got some idea as to which end the bullet comes out of and what to do with the trigger. So I got distinguished with the rifle, and then I got kidnapped, as I like to say, over to the international squad. And this was a combat team type thing. So we competed against all the NATO countries, all of our allied countries, all the services, all the military academies. Everybody competes. Our group was, when I got there, a soup sandwich. It was one of these good old boy things, and you couldn't shoot your way on the team because everybody knew everybody, and they were the same people day in, day out. So unbeknownst, really, one of my friends who was getting ready to be the team captain, and later became the team captain, knew what I could do. And he wanted me to come on board and be the coach. So once I got anointed as the coach, I told everybody, I says, okay, so here's the deal. Everybody's going to shoot their way on the team. If you don't shoot the scores, you don't get to go with the team, period. And that wasn't very popular. And I said, I'll hold myself to that same standard. And, I was a double distinguished shooter. I was a good enough shooter at that point in time that, in all honesty, there were 24 of us on the team, and I was probably the number 3 shooter. So occasionally I'd, show the boys where the bear pooped in the buckwheat, but, most of the time I was busy doing other stuff. My forte was pistol, still is, but I wasn't shy about using a rifle either. And anyhow, so in my tenure with that group, which was about 9 years, we had 5 world championships. And that meant, we beat active Army, Marine Corps, all the reserve teams, National Guard, all the foreign teams, everybody. And, you know, that was a pretty good accomplishment. So with all that, plus doing some military work with people deploying overseas, I got just a unbelievable amount of experience in working with everything from national champions to people that were absolutely afraid of the gun to disabled people. I disabled as an example. I had a female E7 that couldn't even hit a target at 25 meters with an M16 from a rest. And I'm like, okay, she'd been in for 17 years, and I'll just leave it at that. So I went over and I says, so let me see what you're doing here. So she had her index finger, and her index finger was doing this constantly. And every once in a while the gun would go off. And I'm like, what are you doing with your finger? She says, well, I can't feel the trigger. I'm like, say what? She says, I can't feel the trigger with that finger. So I just have to keep moving it until the gun goes off. And I'm like, well, no wonder you can't hit. I mean, good grief.
Yeah.
So I said, what happened? She says, well, I got cut when I was before she went in the Army. And her ulnar nerve had been cut. So she couldn't feel the trigger finger. I said, well, can you feel with your middle finger? Oh, yeah. I said, well, let's use the middle finger to pull the trigger. A little bit of work with her, and she qualified just barely expert from not being able to hit the target. So she got 31 out of 40 hits on the target by just changing the trigger finger. So, that was one of my little feathers in my hat. And one of the things that I've been known for, particularly in the military, is my diagnostic capability. Not only find out what the problem is, tell them what it is, why they're doing it, what we need to do to fix it, and then implement the fix, and then see them through to success. And it's just so simple if you know what you're doing. That it's just crazy. So that kind of took part of the end of things. Bank Miller, who was one of the co-founders of the Sig Academy with me, and I met back in the early 70s, and we were shooting on separate competitive teams. And Bank was about the only one that was giving me any trouble on the scoreboard. So I thought, well, you know what, I ought to go over and just see if I can't break his index finger and eliminate the competition. Well, I don't know whether you know Bank or not, but Bank,
I know of him, but I don't know him.
Nicest guy you ever want to meet. As a matter of fact, he was here to visit me today. He lives in Gulfport, Mississippi, but his daughter lives about 20 minutes from me. So he comes up to visit us sometimes. So he and I had lunch together. Anyhow, so Bank's one of these likable people. I mean, you can't help it. And so we became fast friends. And over the years, we'd find ourselves shooting together, and then we'd go somewhere else. And, and it was like a sine wave. We'd just keep coming back and we'd separate and come back and separate and all that. So I was just finishing up a pretty big military mission at Fort Bragg, and I was getting ready to move elsewhere. And this was on an active duty tour. And all of a sudden, our funding got pulled from under us. And Bank had been asking me about coming to work with him with a reserve unit in the Northern Virginia area. The commanding general was a friend of both ours, and he out of 17 major subordinate commands in the eastern region of the country, he was number 17th in marksmanship, and he wanted to fix that. So anyhow, long story short, I told Bank at first I'm not interested, and then we lost funding, and then I had nowhere to be, and I wasn't quite ready to retire at that point in time. So I called him up and I said, what can we do? He says, well, come on up and I'll introduce you to everybody. And if you like it and they like you, we'll take this ball and run with it. So that all worked out. And in 9 months' time, Bank and I still laugh and joke about it. We took the smokers in the hall, and that was 1989, I guess, 88, 89, somewhere along in there. And that's when you could still smoke, and literally the smokers in the hall. So we'd take these people that didn't have anything to do. Literally, they were just lollygagging out in the hall and ask them if they'd like to learn how to shoot. And, Bank at that point in time, civilian wise, was the chief firearms instructor for the Drug Enforcement Administration at Quantico. So, he knew his way around muzzles and triggers too. So we put together a combat team, and what a combat team is, how that differs from, the standard shooting teams that a lot of people resonate with, is you're shooting rack grade guns, you're shooting with full field gear, just like you were literally going into combat in the field. So you had all the stuff on, and rack grade guns, standard ammunition, and that kind of stuff. So it was a little different world than having the precision pistols and rifles that the bullseye people did. So we put together a combat team. We went to all Army, and what all Army is a composite of all the National Guard folks, all the Army Reserve folks, all the active component folks. And the only people that beat us that year was the 82nd Airplane Gang, 82nd Airborne, and we call them the Airplane Gang. They beat us by X's. And that was it. We tied them a numerical score. And to be real honest and not to be sexist, we had an all-female M60 machine gun team. And those girls just couldn't carry the pig, as we called the M60, as fast as some of those young bucks in the 82nd. So, just a fact of life. But we saw in 9 months what Bank and I could do, and his strong points from my weak points and vice versa. So along about that time, Ted Rowe, who was the president of Sig Arms at that was the name of the company at that juncture, was very interested in getting Sig pistols into the federal agencies and everywhere else, or anywhere else he could possibly get them. So long story short, he hired Bank and myself, and we added Jim Fry for a little while, and he went back to doing whatever he was doing. But Bank and I basically got the academy up and running, and the idea was to teach the law enforcement people armor schools, transition schools, and instructor schools. And of course, the instructor schools were for the larger agencies that we just didn't have the manpower to do transition with. So that's what we got started with, and then it blossomed from there. We did all kinds of advanced stuff. We got involved in defensive tactics and knives, and you name it. My real forte, I mean, somebody's got to take the responsibility, was the armor schools. And I literally taught armor schools in all 50 states and 25 foreign countries. So, I wrote the manuals, did the whole thing from the A to Z. I like the shooting aspect of it, but, also like the mechanical aspect of it. And one of the things that we did to prove that the guns were as good as we were is we do something called the shake and bake. And typically we'd have 30 people in a class, and we take all 30 guns. We usually did 226s or 220s in a 2-day class, and a lot of times we do 230s along with it. And anyhow, we would take let's say we're doing the 226s. We take all 226, take them completely apart, all 50 pieces, throw them in a big tub, have the people keep their serial numbered parts, which is the barrel, slide, and frame,
Mhm.
and then go up to the tub and fish out enough parts to build a gun. And then once they built the gun, they would bring it to us and function check it in front of us, whoever the instructor was, and then we'd take it and function check it and check that off, that they knew what they were doing. They also had an academic test to pass as well. So if they could do that, that told us that they were capable of maintaining, troubleshooting, and repairing guns whose owners, users, or operators' lives depended on those guns to work. And I wasn't bashful about failing people that just couldn't do it, because I just flat said, look, if you can't work on somebody's gun whose life depends on this gun working 100% of the time, there's no way I can certify you to
Mhm.
be an armor. So that's the I guess the first half of it. Then as we got into teaching people how to shoot, there was an economic change with the company, and I went from being a cost center to a profit center. And the problem with that is now I have to make money.
Yeah.
I've got a budget that I've got to deal with. So I had to open up. Prior to that, we were law enforcement, military only. All others need not apply. So then we had to open this thing up to the civilian population, which I had no objection to. But the problem is that you can't teach civilians the way you teach military and law enforcement people, for so many different reasons.
Mhm.
So I started to, build classes. At that bank had retired by that point in time, so I was the director, and I had to build classes that would cater to the civilian end of things. And then I started to think, what about women? And I looked at it from an economic standpoint. I mean, like shooting classes and gun related stuff in today's environment is disposable income territory. All right, we don't have to have these things to live. Some might argue with me on that, and I probably would argue with myself on that, to be honest with you. But anyhow, disposable income. So who controls the disposable income in your household and my household and everybody else's household? It's the lady of the house. So if you can get the lady of the house interested in shooting, all right, that's one thing. And usually the kids, if they're old enough, get involved. So now you've doubled your money or your clients. And of course, the old man has to come along too. He can't be shown up by the little lady of the house, if you know what I'm saying. So now we've got the whole family as customers rather than just one guy as a customer. So we got heavy into the ladies only thing. We evolved into female instructors. My wife at the time, who's probably the greatest female instructor I've ever seen. I mean, she's just magic. And I say at the time, she passed away in September of 18.
My condolences.
She left us fairly quickly, and we don't know why. It's a long story. It's really not appropriate here, but
Yeah.
She influenced so many women, and she influenced so many young kids that it was absolutely amazing. She had just a way of communicating, and she didn't look like the firearms instructor. She was skinny. She was good looking. She very matter of fact, no nonsense. She was a grandma, and she had the best trigger control of anybody, and I mean anybody, that I've ever seen. If you were to take your gun, whatever you carry, and unload it and give it to her and tell her to dry fire at one time, you can rest assured that the gun would not move when the striker released or the hammer fell. I mean, she was amazing.
Mhm.
She was an accomplished hunter, handgun hunter. And she always did this stuff in front of witnesses, so it was like amazing. She shot a whitetail buck at 247 yards with a 10-inch barrel Thompson contender.
Wow.
And the buck was in its bed laying down. She saw it, and the buck stood up and laid back down, and he was done right there. And there were 7 people standing there watching her do it. So anyhow, enough about her. But she led the way, and then we had other female instructors that came in, and we found that women teaching women was just fantastic.
Mhm.
Completely different complexion of a classroom. I would come in and the women would be all prim and proper. I'd leave, and I did this a couple of times. I'd leave and just sit outside and listen to the what's going on in the class after Linda took over. They
Mhm.
were laughing and giggling, and some of the language that they were using made me blush. And, but they were amongst their own, if that makes any
Mhm.
sense. And they were very comfortable. And when she said something, they believed it. Whereas if I came in, it was a different story. They had to be shown and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So anyhow, as we got into that, I really got heavy into diagnostics and, why do people do the things that they do? And I'd already delved into that a little bit with the, the military end of things, flinching, jerking, healing, and all. Why do people
Mhm.
do that? I got into to human vision pretty deep. I worked with 3 different behavioral optometrists, and the behavioral optometrist to a lot of people is like voodoo and witchcraft. I mean, the standard optometrists don't recognize them, and the ophthalmologists don't recognize them either. But in my way of thinking, the behavioral optometrist is really the guy or gal to work with when you're talking about
Mhm.
sport or eye-hand coordination type stuff. So I started to look at, why people do things the way they do. And the first thing that I've felt that needed to be attacked is, why do people jerk the trigger? Why do they jerk the trigger? Why do they flinch? And is there a difference? And I found out there was a difference. And there are all kinds of maladies that crop up, but they all go back to how people learn and how the body naturally responds to things that threaten them. So I started to look at overcoming the self-preservation response, is what I call it. And the reason for that is when a person is threatened, and particularly with a loud noise, it's an invariable action that people take, and they close their eyes momentarily to protect their vision. They lower their center of gravity to prepare for a physical attack. They clench their muscles so that they're ready to launch when they figure out where they're going to go. And then they open their eyes and look for somewhere else to be. And if it's necessary, they go there. So again, they move involuntarily when a noise that is something that they deem as unsafe or threatening is created. So I want to stop right there just for a second.
Sure.
And if we go back to conventional training, you've taught this way, I've taught this way. Everybody that's ever taught firearms has talked about, okay, so we're going to build you from your stance up, and your feet need to be more than the shoulders width apart, dominant foot offset so that the lead edge of the toe is even with the instep, and on and on and on. So we build that all the way up, and we go all the way to sights and trigger and all these things. And what we forgot is over in the adult learning field, the human mind can cognitively process 5 to 7 bits of information. And I'm going to tell you, in my experience, is closer to 5 at a time. And when stress is generated, that diminishes. And sometimes it's down to 1 or 2 bits of information at a time. So if we understand how the subconscious is programmed, we know that that comes through conscious, the cognitive mind. So when the when the cognitive mind, when the
And I'm muted, but I guess we'll give it away there.
you know, when the cognitive mind is occupied with, stance and trigger and all these other crazy things, it's completely overloaded. So when the gun goes off, there's no way for the subconscious mind to understand that that noise is of no consequence to your personal safety. And to be specific for those that are interested, the 2 little guys in the brainstem called the amygdala, they're your crisis control center. And they are the guys, when you touch the hot stove, that cause you to respond without thinking that, wow, going to create a blister, better move my hand. Don't have to do that. You automatically respond. So when the amygdala feels threatened, that's when the body moves involuntarily to prepare for attack and escape. So that's the one of the reasons that people jerk and heel and flinch and all that other good stuff. The other reason is we're programmed to protect our vision at all cost. And if you and I were in the same room together, if I wadded up just a piece of paper and threw it at you, you could not keep your eyes open and watch it bounce off your nose. Can't do it. You'd catch it, you'd move your head, you'd blink, you'd take evasive action, in other words. So when the gun fires, it moves back towards your face. And if your brain, your amygdala, doesn't understand that the movement of the gun is of no consequence to your vision or your personal safety, it's natural to close the eyes to protect your vision. It's also natural to push the gun, to preempt the rearward movement of the gun with a forward push. And when you see people shooting the ground halfway between them and the target, you know that they are not comfortable with the movement of the gun. So therefore, when they pull the trigger, they're preempting that rearward movement with the forward push. And that's why the muzzle's pointing at the ground when the bullet comes out. So with all that, I'm like, okay, so how do we fix this? And I'm a big one for keeping things simple. Simple is good. I mean, that's something that is called the Sig principle. The less fluff that you can have, the better off you are. So I looked at, all right, so how can we program a person so that they understand that this noise and this movement of the gun is of no consequence to their personal safety? And so I decided, okay, what we'll do is we'll take them to the range. And I'm going to talk about individual people. That you can do this with multiples in certain cases as well. But worst case scenario, take the person to the range, no target, just a backstop that'll accept the bullet, and have them load the gun, point it into the backstop, and have them close their eyes, because we want to eliminate every sensory possibility that we can, and let them listen to the gun. And one of the secrets to doing that is to suggest that the gun is going to just be a light pop. not an explosion, not a bang, not anything other than a light pop. Make sure that they've got plugs and muffs in, and you have them shoot one round on your command, and suggest to them that you'd like for them to savor that sound, much like they would a piece of hard candy if they were just kind of swishing it around in the mouth. I want you to savor that sound and give them a minute or so, and let them shoot another one. And I'm a big one with ABC 1, 2, 3. That's how we learn a lot of things in life, and why not use it on firearms? So I let them shoot 3 shots on my command, and I suggest then that if they'd like to shoot a few more just to listen to it on their own, they're welcome to do that. They've got plenty of ammunition. They can shoot as many as they like. I've never had a student go more than 6 total rounds. That's not saying they won't, but you know, that it's like I let them, quote unquote, get comfortable. They get bored with it. Okay, you know, I'm ready to do the next thing now. Done that, right? So 6 is generally all it takes. The other half of it is when I talk about gun movement, I talk about the gun pushes in the hand. I don't talk about recoil. I don't talk about kick. I mean, when I'm talking to instructors and I'm explaining why we don't use, let's say, the word kick, I'm like, do you know anybody that likes to be kicked? Other than Gary Klukowicz, I don't think there's anybody else on the planet. If you know Gary, you understand, but he's a great guy. But nobody likes to be kicked. So when you tell somebody the gun's just going to kick a little bit, you've just told them that they're going to be hurt. They don't know how long it's going to last or how bad it's going to be, but they're going to be hurt because they're going to be kicked. Now, when we use the word push, different story. In our society, you know, if you need to get into a crowded elevator, you can kind of push your way in without pissing too many people off. But if you start kicking and swinging, you know, people are going to throw down and get back after you. So when we talk about the gun movement as it fires, it pushes in the hand, the muzzle lifts off the target and settles back to the original location. So the idea with that is I'm pre-programming them to understand what to expect when they shoot multiple shots. They don't have to fight the gun. They just let it rise and settle and rise and settle. And it's real simple. When we shoot the first couple of shots, I get their head out of the way. And if they're a right-handed shooter, I'll have them look at the front left of the slide so that they can see. And I pre-program them a little. See how little the gun moves when you fire it. So we look at the left side, we may look at the right, depends on, you know, it's kind of intuitive to me. But to start with, it'd be good to look, you know, a few shots on one side, a few shots on the other, and then look at the back of the gun, like the back plate on a Glock or the hammer on a hammer-fired gun. Look directly at that and pull the trigger and see how little the gun moves. So what you've done at that point in time is you've proven to the amygdala, the crisis control center, that noise is of no consequence to the personal safety, and the movement of the gun is of no consequence to the personal safety. So that pretty well eliminates jerking and heeling and flinching and all these other crazy things that people find themselves doing that move the muzzle off the target before the bullet exits. And of course, if that happens, we don't hit the target. So those little odds and ends are critical, in my opinion, for foundational level shooters and for shooters that are having trouble shooting. I mean, I've taken people that have been shooting for 20, 30 years or whatever, you know, and you know, they weren't particularly successful. And once they understood, and this is a magic word, why, you know, what's going on, I'm a big what, how, and why kind of guy, you know, and you know, no matter what it is, you have to be able to describe it. You have to be able to demonstrate how to perform it, and you have to be able to explain why it's beneficial to the person that you're teaching it to. And if you can't do any of those three, you got no business teaching it. Give it to somebody else. So, I can go on and on and on and on with different diagnostics and different types of things, different drills. One I would like to cover is the wall drill.
Sure. I actually had that in my notes to ask you about.
Okay.
So
All right. Good.
Go right ahead.
Good. So, and let me just say this. I haven't invented anything. I haven't had an independent thought in my whole life, I don't think. And realistically speaking, somebody else has thought of this. I may be the vehicle for this particular platform, but I'm nobody special. I'm nobody unique, and it's just my way of explaining it. And for a lot of people, it makes sense. And if it makes sense, they'll accept it and use it. So anyhow, the wall drill came from a self-diagnostic that I had on myself. And to be honest with you, I've been my biggest test bed. Most of the stuff that I came up with, I had this problem, and then I had to figure out why I had it, and then I had to figure out what to do about it, and then how to fix it. And I come to find out that I'm not unique, that all these other people out here that are having the same problem, have the same things that I do. So I found out that I'd conditioned myself as I pulled the trigger that my eye focus would transition as the trigger would go to the rear, my eye focus would transition towards the target. And I'd conditioned myself to try to see the impact of the bullet on the target at the time the bullet impacted the target. So I finally figured out what I was doing, but I couldn't stop it. And I'm like, I have this theory: if you can't convince them, you force them, and that's really basically the only two ways you can change somebody's mind. So I figured, okay, I can't make myself do this, so I'll make myself do this. So what I reverted back to was years and years and years ago when I first started shooting militarily. We would take a number 2 lead pencil, put tape around it, and put it down the muzzle of the 1911 and dry fire up against a wall with that pencil. And we literally would shoot groups with the pencil point. And that actually was pretty effective. But what I did is I took that and I thought, okay, so my eye won't stay on the front sight. If I have something in the way so it can't go forward of the front sight, I'll make it stay on the front sight. So that's how the wall drill got started. I literally touch the wall and then break contact with the wall so that the gun was free to move and pull the trigger. And when I first started doing that, it was very painful to my eye because my body had conditioned itself so that as the trigger finger moved rearward, the eye focus moved forward. And since there was nowhere for the eye focus to go, the muscles in the eye were trying to make it go somewhere, but we couldn't get there from here. So I'm like, okay, this will help with follow through. And then I found out that when I was pulling the trigger, the front sight would dance in the rear sight notch. It would go left or right or up or down or whatever. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, shoot, when I'm doing this live fire, that's exactly what the gun's doing. And that's why my shots are going places that I didn't think they were going to go. And then I found that not only did I have some visual things to work with, I had some trigger finger things to work with. It's like, how am I pulling the trigger? How am I gripping the gun? Am I doing this with 2 hands or with 1 hand? And I found that, and this is typical for a lot of shooters, they'll shoot 1 or 2 shots pretty good with the index finger. And then as they start to quote unquote bear down on number 3, 4, and 5, if we're going to shoot a 5-shot group, the rest of the fingers get involved.
Yep.
And, it's what we call milk in the grip. You can call it whatever you want to, but as the trigger finger moves, the rest of the fingers start to join in. And, the wall drill diagnoses that because you see it and you feel it. So, long story short, I always said that the wall drill teaches you what you need to see and feel in order to deliver a good shot. There's so much you can do with it, with, one hand, two hand, both hands. You can shoot wall drill with rifles, prone position, different position, everything. And to go right back to where I start most of my lessons, which is fairly important, and I encourage the listeners to pay attention here. When we're working with firearms, there are two things that we're primarily concerned with. Number one is safety, and number two is success. Safety is defined as going home with the same amount of holes you left home with.
Mm-hmm.
Success is defined as hitting your target. In order to do either one, all you have to know is two things. Number one is muzzle management, and number two is trigger finger discipline. From a safety standpoint, we all understand that the only place the bullet comes out of the gun is the end of the barrel, or the muzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So if we keep that muzzle pointed in a safe direction, and we define that's any direction in which, should the gun fire, minimal property damage and no personal injury would occur. It's simple. So when we touch the gun for the first time in its storage location, and we carry it to wherever it is that we're going to carry it, or put it in our holster or whatever else, we need to be cognitively aware of where the muzzle is pointing. And as long as it's pointed in a safe direction, we're in good shape. From a success standpoint, if the muzzle's pointing at the target when the bullet exits, what do you think the likelihood of hitting the target might be?
It's pretty great if it's pointed at the target.
There you go. I mean, that's it. So if you're managing the muzzle and you've got the muzzle pointed at the target,
Mm-hmm.
what's not to like?
Right.
So with trigger finger discipline, it's real simple again, safety and success. No gun that most of us would be caught handling will go off by itself. So if we keep our primary digit off the trigger until we're on the target and ready to shoot it,
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Now, the success end of things is pretty simple. If you can stabilize the muzzle on the target and pull the trigger without affecting that stability, you will hit within the gun and the ammunition's capability of shooting. Can you argue with me on that?
Nope.
Okay. So most people can't either. I've had some that, you see, take a deep breath and like, some of my contemporaries who will remain nameless call me Mr. Non-Arguable. I don't think quite that hard, but I'd like to present things so that it really makes sense, and it's kind of hard to argue. So when I'm working with anybody new, I don't care who it is. I don't care if they've never touched a gun. I don't care if they're, special warfare, whatever's, it doesn't make any difference.
Mm-hmm.
Muzzle management, trigger finger discipline, safety and success. That's your foundation. And we can build on that. Or if that's all you need, have time to know, that'll keep you out of trouble. So when we talk about stabilizing the muzzle,
Mm-hmm.
that's literally you point the gun at the target and hold it as still as you can. That varies from day to day. That varies with your caffeine intake. That varies with your rest. That varies with a whole bunch of different things. But you can't make yourself any more still by trying than you can if you can actually relax just a little bit. Hold the gun as still as you can. Learning to operate the trigger, and I don't think it's any real argument these days. And I used to get a lot of argument about which was more important, the sights or the trigger. And I'm like, well, take the sights off the gun and give me the gun with a decent trigger, and I'll just shoot your ass to death, like right away. I don't need sights. If you understand how to position the muzzle in relation to the target, and sights are helpful, but we don't have to have them. However, if you can't smoothly operate the trigger to a degree that you don't add much, and preferably no extra movement to the muzzle, it's going to be hard to hit the target. Just plain and simple. So one of the things, now I'll kind of deviate here a little bit. I learned this with the wall drill, and I brought it together with a few other concepts. And as we may have talked about previously, I like to blend biomechanics, vision, and the brain all into one part of shot delivery. So, and this is magic. This works just absolutely amazing. So I'll tell the student, all right, put the sights on the target, and I like to use center, just a center of whatever. It works combat, competition, anything else, but just put the sights on the target. See the front sight, put your finger on the trigger, and pull the front sight back through the rear sight notch, just like it was on a rail. So what I'm doing is I'm occupying the eye, the trigger finger, and the brain all at the same time to one common goal. Not only does that help you to achieve the goal consistently, time after time after time again, that also helps to eliminate distraction. So if you got the three aspects necessary to deliver a shot working together, just put the sights on the target, put your finger on the trigger, pull the front sight to the eye, and you're good to go. Of course, I know we've got the red dot folks out there thinking, well, what about the red dot? Well, you pull the red dot to the center of the eye with the trigger. And it's very much like you, I'm going to date myself. Everybody knows I'm old anyway, but years ago we had a carburetor linkage, and gas pedal to the, we didn't even have carburetor. Nobody knows what a carburetor is, much less the linkage. But anyhow, there was a connection from the gas pedal to the carburetor. And when you pressed on the gas, that opened the butterflies on the carburetor and increased the airflow and the gas into the engine, made it go faster. All right. So envision some sort of a connection. If you're old like me, carburetor linkage would work fine. I mean, you pick your own thing, but a connection between the trigger and the front sight. And as you move the trigger, you move the front sight just like it were on a rail through the center of the rear sight notch. So that, from a precision standpoint, is absolute magic. From somebody that needs to shoot a lot of shots quickly but accurately, that's magic as well. So we can, the wall drill will help you do all that stuff. It helps you to keep your eye focus where it's supposed to. It helps you to move the trigger without causing extra movement of the gun. It helps you to understand that your grip needs to be consistent. It's a great self-diagnostic tool. And, the step past that is something we call the bullet hole drill. I didn't invent that. I have my own slant on the bullet hole drill, but basically with the, once you're comfortable with the wall drill, then you get 10 feet, 3 yards away from the target, and plain target. My favorite target, by the way, is an 8-inch paper plate. I mean, you take all the rest of the targets in the world, throw them in a trash can. I don't care. The 8-inch
Mhm.
paper plate does everything from a hunting standpoint, combat standpoint, planking. I mean, you name it. Plus, you got something to eat dinner on too. So, and we've done that. I
Mhm.
did a class for a bunch of folks, and they got pizza in and all that, and didn't have anything to eat off of them. So they took all my target plates and we made the pizza off, and then we shot the dirty plates. So
There you go.
got 2 for the price of 1. So
Mhm.
um, the original bullet hole drill was just shoot a hole in a target,
Mhm.
and then cover that hole up with your front sight and shoot all the rest of the shots, 5, 10, whatever you got, in that same hole. And the goal was to be able to have all shots at least touching, if not well within that that hole. And ultimately, and I've done this a couple of times, and I've seen a few other people do it a couple of times. Shooting a 9mm, you shoot 10 shots, and you literally have a 9mm hole. It's just one hole. Can't do it all the time. I'm not even sure I can do it at all anymore, but
Mhm.
that's kind of the goal. So that is a great diagnostic tool. You can shoot it right-handed, left-handed, two-hand, all the variables, and that works good. If you've got somebody that's wants to look at their target, this helps to break them from looking at their target, because you're close enough that there's no real need to. The
Mhm.
interesting thing is you can take that target and you can, let's say, move them out to 15 yards or 25 yards. The holes in the 3-yard target that are out of the group, so to speak, they might even be touching, but they're out like at 7 o'clock or something like that. You will
Mhm.
see the same pattern at distance.
Yep.
And what that tells you is their gripping fingers are getting involved in the trigger movement. But your diagnostics at 3 yards, the same thing at 15 yards, 25 yards. It just looks bigger at
Mhm.
distance.
Yeah.
So those are interesting little things. And to be honest with you, Spalding is a great guy for teaching combatives. And
Mhm.
to be honest with you, I would pass my students off to him for the combative end of things. I can teach it. I've taught it and done well with it. But my real interest is to get somebody foundationally sound, so that on demand they can put the shot exactly where they want it. They can do it right-handed, left-handed. Um, you know, uh, I teach a point and precision class. We take the sights completely off the guns. We shoot steel plates or paper plates at 25 yards with the guns with no sights, and we expect to hit them. It's like, how can this be? Well, you have to understand hand coordination, number one, and you have to understand the relationship with the gun, the outline of the slide or the outline of the gun, which correlates directly to the muzzle, which is where the bullet
Mhm.
comes out. So it's all easy stuff if you understand, what you need to do.
Right.
And that takes me over to another area. And feel free to stop me if you've got a question on that.
No, no, go right ahead. Go ahead.
Um, I I like to do stuff called objective-based training. Um, and the objective-based training is basically, I'll take a student that has some skill, they can load and unload the gun and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And I'll tell them what I want them to be able to do. And rather than going through all this detail of, you got to grip this and you got to hold it just like this, and your feet have got to be just so. And I mean, you've seen it where instructors have gone out there and moved somebody's foot, like an inch and a half,
Mhm.
to correct their stance. And I'm like, cut me some slack, will you? But anyhow, I'd like to see what I can actually get out of the student naturally before I start to modify whatever they can do naturally. And I've found that people are incredibly adaptable. And if you just tell them what you want to do or you want them to do, they'll probably do it. So again, when I'm talking to instructors, I'm like, when you're working with people, give them something to work with or work towards, and tell them you don't care. It's like going through a mountain. You don't care if they go over the mountain, through it, under it, around it, or whatever, as long as they're on the other side of the mountain. Why do you care? And, when we're talking stance, as an example, I tend to be very generic about it because everybody's built a little different. We all have different centers of gravity. And we all have different ranges of motion. You might have bad knees, bad back, and all this. Why the heck am I telling you you got to do this? Why don't I just tell you, all I want you to do is to stabilize the muzzle on the target, and I want you to be able to operate the trigger without affecting that stability. That's number one. Number two, from a stance standpoint, I want you to be able to move left, right, forward, or backward with equal ease. And that's really all I'm worried about, because you have balance if you can stand up. You have mobility if you can move left, right, forward, or backward. And you have stability if you can stabilize the muzzle on the target. Why am I worried about anything else? I haven't had anybody really give me a good solid answer. So I can do, I've shot, national and international level competitive shooting, and I understand, stance and, how, my rifle jackets, when we shot high power, you'd put 2 sweatshirts on and a leather jacket, and you'd lace this thing up until you were just, you could barely move, and you're standing there shooting the rifle offhand. You were in a stance and in a position that was necessary to shoot the precision that we needed to do. But unless you're doing that kind of stuff, why are you concerned about that? When I talk simple things like natural point of aim, your body's in a neutral position. There's no muscle tension. You're relaxed. That's it. Your eye-hand coordination puts you on the target. It's like, hey, you point the target. We've been doing this since we were babies in the crib. So if the gun fits you, which is a completely different story, the gun should point just like you pointed your index finger. If the gun points, just like you point your index finger, the gun fits. And if you can reach the trigger and pull the trigger without moving the muzzle off the target, you notice I don't talk about disturbing the sight alignment. Sight alignment is good, but the only reason you got sights on the gun is to help you to refine the position of the muzzle on the target. The position of the muzzle is the answer to the question. So, and please argue with me. I know I'm talking to somebody that really knows what he's doing. I know I'm talking to somebody that's a great instructor. If there's a question or an argument or just a difference of opinion, it doesn't insult me in the least.
I don't have any disagreement. I'm enjoying taking all this information.
So, the objective-based thing, that just streamlines the learning process. And going back to the simple end of things, if you can make something so simple that it's easy to learn, it makes sense, people will do it. If you add so much to it, you've got to do this and you've got to do this and you've got to do every got to is I don't want to do this. This is too hard for
uh,
me. I'm not interested. I need to be
uh,
somewhere else. What about lunch?
uh,
But if you take it from the standpoint, okay, point the gun at the target. What I want you to do is pull the trigger, shoot one shot. Okay, keep the gun up on the target. I want you to take a step to the left. All right, point the gun at the target, pull the trigger. Okay. And, if we wanted to do different positions and that kind of stuff, let's say intermediate positions, I usually take people from standing to kneeling. Just put both knees on the ground. And if you want to go to the prone position, lean forward, finger off the trigger, keep the muzzle pointed towards the target, and it's simple, easy stuff to get in and out of for most people. Can I make it more difficult? I can make it so difficult that it's absolutely impossible for anybody to get there. But why? My job is to make positive behavioral change in other human beings so that it's useful to them, so that they enjoy it and they're successful. Period.
As you mentioned Spalding a couple of times, the hallmark of the handgun combatives
Oh, he's
thing is
terrific.
get the firearm between you and the bad guy in a usable form, and then press the trigger without misaligning the gun. And it's that simple. And we, the Imperial we, tend to overcomplicate the whole thing by telling them, this much percentage of your grip with this hand, this much percentage of that hand, activate these, and it's putting so much misinformation or useless extraneous information in a shooter's heads. Yeah. Put the gun between you and them in a usable form, and then press the trigger without misaligning the gun.
So let me, I want to come back to grip just for a minute, but let me say something that it's been a pet peeve of mine. I'm not calling you down, so don't go there.
Oh, go right ahead.
But so you notice I keep saying pull the trigger, and you notice I don't say press the trigger, and I use the word press, and I, back during the Stone Age, I actually used the word squeeze, but I always tell people when they talk about squeeze the trigger, I said, think about the last thing you squeezed. Don't want to know, it's none of my business, but I guarantee you did it with all fingers together. And if you tell somebody to squeeze the trigger, you're giving them permission to do this. So that's a no-no. As far as press and pull, and I've gotten into some really good discussions with people over, all right. So when you get on an elevator, you press a button to change the floor, correct? Okay. When you bench press, whatever it is, you are moving the weights away from you, correct?
Sure.
In both cases, and I can go on, but I think you got the point. So when we move the trigger to cause the gun to fire, do we move it away from us, or do we move it to us?
Move it to us.
And when we are pulling a rope, we're not pressing a rope, we're pulling a rope to us. You with me?
Yes, sir.
So when we talk to our students, and particularly the foundational levels that don't know anything, if we tell them to press the trigger, we confuse their mind with what they understand press to be, as opposed to what pull might be.
Okay.
So my contention is why teach them something that's conflicting with what they've known all their life? Why not just tell them what they're going to do and be done with it? So that's the reason I say pull the trigger. And that's the reason I don't say press the trigger. And I don't hold, people can say press or whatever they want to. I don't care. It doesn't make any difference. But it's, again, how people learn. So I use something called analogous training. And, it's taking something that somebody's familiar with, and then I parlay that over into what I want them to become familiar with. And I've worked with, pro ball players, all kinds of folks, golfers. Golfers are kind of my favorite, because golf is so similar to shooting. It's just unbelievable. The way you grip the golf club is very similar to the way you grip a handgun. Your eye focus has to be on the back of the ball through the contact of the club. If you let your eye go forward of the ball going down range, it's no telling where it's going to go. But if you keep your eye focus, so these are all things, your balance, and you're actually the body physiology, the mindset, all this stuff is directly paralleled. So we talk about eye-hand coordination. I've had Major League Baseball pitchers that wanted to shoot better. One in particular that he was a real hot shot for the Sox for a while, and he was a right-handed pitcher, but he's left eye dominant. And I'm like, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to look at what you want to hit with the gun, and I want you to envision taking your hand and just pointing the gun right where you're looking. And it was like amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And to get to him, I had to tell him, I said, look, make believe I am your pitching coach because I'm your shooting coach. And all of a sudden, I broke through that you can't talk to me, or I can't hear you, or whatever. So the words that you use and the associations, one of my absolute best ones is calling the trigger the gas pedal of the gun. And I'll give the analogy of, okay, so you've got your, depending on who I'm talking to, but let's say you've got your 700 horsepower, you name it. All right. So you pull up to a four-way stop sign and you look left and right, and oh my goodness, right there to the right is the po-po. And the po-po is looking at you real hard. So when you, as he motions you to cross the intersection in front of him, when you manipulate the gas pedal, do you just nail it and leave black rubber all the way across? Or do you operate that gas pedal with a smooth, fluid motion in order to accelerate on out of the eyes of the po-po? All right. So smooth, fluid movement of the trigger is the critical thing. And if you accelerate and decelerate, you can use the brake pedal, it's the same way. How do you use the brake pedal? How do you use the gas pedal? That's how you operate the trigger. And in both directions, you control the trigger in both directions. So that, everybody that, I say everybody, 98% of the people that I've taught, have been able to drive a car. So they understand how to operate the gas pedal. They understand how to operate the brake. And if they now understand the smooth, fluid movement of operating the trigger in the same manner, it's just, I don't have to teach them a thing. They know exactly what I'm talking about. I do get some pushback with some of the guys. I'll just put a name with it. Todd Jarrett and I, we're good friends, and he contends that you should never control the trigger after the gun fires back forward. And he's right for somebody at his level. Problem is that most of the people that I run into are nowhere near his level. So they need to control the trigger in both directions. And I have something that I came up with, and again, I hesitate to say I came up with it because other people have done it, but I call it the reset drill. And basically, you shoot the shot, and as the muzzle lifts, you reset the trigger. And then as the muzzle settles back to the original location, you're already applying pressure to the trigger so that when the gun comes back to the original location, discharge should take place. That's the most efficient, quickest way to fire multiple shots. You know, and as long as you can be consistent and smooth with it, you can shoot as fast as you can operate the trigger. But you know, that's just another one of those little simple things that make sense. It's really not arguable.
Right.
So
Right.
anyhow, so ask me some questions. I'm just rambling on here. So
I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it very much.
good.
And I was looking back through my notes here. One thing I do want to get into from reading your bio
Okay.
was that you were involved in numerous government firearms purchase testing and contracts and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of a story, and you and I talked about this before we started recording.
Yeah.
A major PD here in Georgia was testing for new firearms, and the recoil spring assembly on one of the firearms that was provided for them for this test broke.
Yep.
A representative from the company told me what happened.
Yep.
Who was there as part of the test. He's like, yeah, our recoil spring broke in the middle of the test. We knew we were done at that point.
Yep.
And everything that the other company was going to get the contract. I have heard so many stories about what happened that thing, that the pistol blew up, the slide blew off, all this kind of stuff. It was the recoil spring broke.
Mhm.
I would really love to hear, from your experience, what goes into testing, because we read on the internet and all this stuff about, the big army is testing to pick a new pistol, or the
Yeah.
FBI is doing. What actually happens during all that testing, and what goes on during the procurement processes?
Yeah. So the procurement is just like buying shoes or chain,
Mhm,
whatever. They put out an RFP, a request for proposal. Then
mhm,
anybody that wants to bid on it sends in the appropriate paperwork. And I mean, it's a long and
Oh
involved.
yeah.
And I'm to be perfectly candid. When we get an RFP, I had other people that would take care of that, and I
Mhm,
wasn't interested. I also had people that would prepare the guns, and what that meant is take the guns that we were going to send and make sure that all the screws were tight, and look at the dang things. I mean, you'd be surprised. People send guns and let's just, I won't name names and all this, but
mhm,
I am aware, let's put it this way, I am aware of guns that were sent to a particular place that had been bought and paid for, that they told them that each gun was fired and so on and so forth and all this. Guns didn't even have lands and grooves in the barrel. Guns, the triggers wouldn't work. These were double action, single action guns, and you could cock the hammer and it would fall back forward again. Guns with no sights on them, or guns that the sights were loose in the dovetail and just fell out. And these are different brands. I mean, I'm not going to pin the tail on any one donkey, but the bottom line is if you are that stupid to send junk out the door, you don't deserve the contract.
right.
So basically what happens is the agency, whoever it may be, says we want, let's say, 25 guns, and you'll send them 25 guns, and then they will select maybe 5, and they'll throw them in the pond or run over them with a truck, or do whatever they some of the stuff you just can't imagine, but they got to do this. One agency would take a gun and put it up sideways and shoot the gun. I mean, shoot at the gun and have the bullet hit the side of the gun to see if it would disable the gun, and then they would turn it over. I guess that has some merit. It's probably
Yeah.
happened somewhere along the line, but I mean,
Yeah.
you got to look at likelihoods and all that. But anyhow,
Yeah.
so then they would take uh, maybe 5 more guns and they'd shoot them, or they'd take them apart and put them back together. Or they do whatever they're going to do.
Mhm.
And then I show up, and I have well, basically a team of people that I hire. They're not company employees, usually. And we have a protocol to shoot. And I guess probably the first one I did was when we put the 228 in the federal service, and we went to Quantico, and we had to shoot 5,000 rounds through 5 different guns. So that's a total of 25,000 rounds. And we had, I believe it was 3 days to do it. And, it was just load them and shoot them and load them and shoot them and load them and shoot them. You could clean them every 500 rounds. And each time the guns were cleaned, they had agency, and they were the FBI gun vault people that would take the gun and inspect it and measure it and, make it look like they knew what they were doing anyway. And that was the first thing we did. We had one failure, and we fired 50,000 rounds of ammunition. So it must have been 10,000 instead of 5,000. Anyhow, we had one failure, and the gun failed to lock back after the last shot was fired one time. And I think the shooter had his thumb on the slide stop, but anyhow, that was the only failure. And we had observers there, multiple observers from multiple agencies, because this was going to be a multiple agency purchase. So we had, like U.S. Marshals and DEA and, DCIS and all kinds of people. So those tests are individual, protocols. They want you to be able to shoot this amount of rounds. They may measure accuracy. One of the tests that I did, this was for DEA again at Quantico. They wanted, after I believe it was 10 or 15,000 rounds, they wanted to make sure that the point of impact on the gun hadn't changed. So we had to shoot groups to start and groups in various places. So you have all these different protocols. We did the Federal Air Marshals. All they wanted to do is to shoot 20,000 rounds through, I think it was 5 different guns, as quickly as we could get them through there. And, to see would the guns stand 20,000 rounds. And these were 229, 357 SIGs. And I think we lost maybe 1 or 2 extractors, which was like, no big deal. When we did the DHS test, that was in 2004. That was a huge contract. And we had multiple guns, multiple calibers, just all kinds of stuff. And we were kind of behind the power curve, because the H&K people pretty well had this one in the bag. As a matter of fact, when you went to the unit chief's office, he had H&K paraphernalia all over the place. It was just like so obvious. It was like, why bother? And I've been used to being hard-headed, maybe stubborn a little, but I'm like, screw these people. We'll go in there and we'll beat their ass. And we did. So they gave me the responsibility of putting together the teams. I put together 3 test teams. We went to Altoona, Pennsylvania. I think we were there only 3 weeks. We had 6 weeks to do it. We did it in half the time. But I dressed everybody in the same shirt, the same pants, the same shoes. I had two women that shot. As a matter of fact, the interesting thing on the two women, the only two guns that broke were in the hands of the women. The one woman, well, one was my wife. She weighed about 110 pounds with 2 pockets full of bullets. So she was a little bit of a thing, broke a locking insert. And the other woman was how would I put this? She was a large, robust woman. She came out of a police agency where she liked to go out and go on the street and kick the bad guys' asses, and she could do it. Okay, so she was, you know, the opposite of the little girl. Both those ladies broke parts on the guns, and nobody else, none of the guys broke any parts on the guns. So when we went, and again, we had a specific protocol to go through. We had inspectors watching us 100% of the time from the time we drove on the property, and I ran it like a military operation. We had 2 vans, and both vans were full of people. And when we got there, we parked the vans, we got out. Everybody had a place to be and a place to go. I kind of was I guess I was the team leader, and you know, I interfaced with the government people, and you know, they brought the ammunition, we shot the ammunition, and you know, we policed up the brass and cleaned the guns and did all the stuff. And you know, they were totally impressed, because none of the other teams had that kind of organization. None of the other teams had guns that would last the way ours did. B, and at the what am I trying to say? When they were going to tell us that we got the contract or whatever, the first thing that says, "You guys kicked ass." Never before have we seen anything so organized, so efficient, and so smooth. And so we got the contract. So a lot of it is, honestly, it's professionalism. You know, I mean, I have a military background. I have a little bit of bearing and poise, and you know, I know how to relate to people, and I can schmooze pretty good too if I need to. But you know, one of the things that I was always known for was my honesty and integrity. You know, I wouldn't lie to them. You know, if we screwed up or something was screwed up, hey, you know, there you go. So
you know that one thing we can impart to the audience is that initial RFP can often shape the entire procurement procedure. Because, like, say, if I'm doing it for a pistol, and I write in the RFP that the pistol must have double strike capability, well, then I've just eliminated all the striker fire guns.
well,
And so it's
almost
only,
all of them.
most, pretty much, so we're back to a double single or a double action only or a
Yep.
single action only hammer fire gun at that
Yeah,
point.
sure. Yeah,
I know that, not gun related, I wrote an RFP in a previous existence for digital signs to put along the side of the highways with information on them.
right.
And I wanted a particular sign. And so I was talking to the guy from that company, and I said, "Tell me something technologically wise that is in your signs that none of your competitors
Sure.
have."
Not
And I
all
just
of them.
wrote that it had, yeah,
Yep.
I wrote that the signs had to have that piece of technology in it.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, that's done all the time as well. And you know, then you got protests, you know, I mean, when you got a multi-bazillion dollar thing, you know, like the military contract, you know, Glock protest and all that. But you know, most of the time these things are, you know, they are pretty well decided in you know,
Right.
beforehand.
Yeah.
I will tell you another quick little story on RFPs. The M11 in the U.S. military. You familiar with that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. So the sales manager came into my office one day. This was May of 1990, actually, and he throws a letter down on my desk and he says, yeah, you're an Army guy. See if you want to do anything with this," and turns around and walks off. So there was it wasn't really an RFP. There was kind of a sourcing letter
Mhm.
for a compact combat pistol, and it came out of Fort McClellan, Alabama. And there was a guy named Staff Sergeant Schiff, which made no sense to me whatsoever, because the staff sergeant, is that's a little above his pay grade.
Mhm.
Anyhow, so anyhow, I called this guy up and I said, "So I see you guys want a 225," and he says, "Yep, that's right." He says, "Can you come and demonstrate one?" I said, "Well, yes, I can, but let me tell you something first." And I said, "I'm intimately familiar with the Beretta 92, and I know that Beretta makes a single stack 9mm that's of that same type, and there's lots of parts in compatibility, and they make a double stack that it's a 13 round magazine capacity. It's it's a compact gun, which would actually be a better choice. So, wouldn't you be better off going with the Beretta?" And there was this long silence. And he says, "What you don't understand is we don't want no GD Beretta." And I'm like, "All right, I read you loud and clear, you know."
Yeah.
And I said, "So what about a 228?" He says, "What you don't understand, is okay."
Yes, sir.
So it was sometime in June, I forget
Mhm.
the date, but back into June, I arranged to go down to Fort Benning, and I'd pushed troops at Benning, and I'd been
Mhm.
all over Benning, and the place that they had me go was a place I'd never seen or heard of before. No lights, no water, no nothing. There was
Mhm.
a wooden shack with wooden field tables and folding chairs out in the middle of an impact area. And I'm like, okay. So before I went, there was another point of contact there, and I told the guy, I was getting my bearings as to when I was going to fly in and all that kind of good stuff. And I said, let me just try this one more time. I said, I know you guys want the 225, and I said the 228 is actually the same size gun. It's got a few more rounds, 5 more rounds of magazine capacity. The magazine catch is reversible on that particular gun. It's just a better gun. It's got a better trigger than the 225. And he says, "Well, I'll tell you what." He says, "I'm going to schedule you for 11 o'clock, and you've got from 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock to do everything you need to do with the 225. And you've got from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock. If anybody wants to forego lunch and listen to you,
Mhm.
you can talk about the 228. So long story short, we were right in the middle of nowhere. We didn't have anything, and we couldn't go get lunch. So I pretty well had a captive audience, and I showed these guys the 228. So probably 6 weeks later, I got a phone call. "Can you come to Aberdeen and do a demo with the 228?" I'm like, "Sure. When do you want me there?" They said, "How about tomorrow?" Like, uh, I'll see. So anyhow, I went down to Aberdeen and I met George Neuenhouse, who was the guy that did the M9. Uh,
Mhm.
and in fact, I got to see all the test weapons that they had, the Berettas and the Smiths and the SIGs, of course, and all that. But so I did a presentation to all the guys at the armor shop there. And then I went back again, and this was the strangest situation. There was a lady there who was a contracting officer, and I I was there. I took the gun completely apart. Any questions that were asked had to be asked to her by the audience. Now I had bird colonels and people in civilian clothes and master sergeants and all kinds of stuff like that. And I couldn't talk to them. I had to talk to her, and then she would turn around. It's like we were speaking foreign languages and we were all speaking English.
Mhm.
I never did figure out the reason for that. But at any rate, then they wanted 5 guns to be sent, or actually it was 15, and they were going to shoot 5. So they shot the guns on their own, and they didn't have any problems, with, just line soldiers. So then we got into how much are you going to sell these to us, and, and all this kind of good stuff. And then we had to build a special place for the ammunition, the military ammunition. We had to have a special place for inspectors to come in. And I mean, it's long and involved, and a lot of unnecessary stuff that goes on. But that's how the M11 came into existence. So just odds and ends. I can tell you about the Sig rifles that we tested, and we shoot the guns until they were so hot you couldn't hold them, and we'd dip them in a 5-gallon bucket of water, and the steam would just fly. And we'd crank them back up again, and off we go.
It's funny how it runs the whole gamut of, sometimes it's a pure scientific process and everything else is we're going to select the best one based on this testing protocol. And then other times it comes down to whose personality is driving the whole train.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then sometimes it comes down to cost per unit.
Yeah.
Well, we want this gun, but we have to buy X number of units of them, and we can get this gun over here, and it's $10 less per unit or $20 less per unit. Okay, well, if you're buying 10 guns, that might not be a big deal. If you're buying 100,000 guns, that's a big deal. And that may play into the decision-making factor as well.
Well, let me give you a real good one.
Sure.
The Federal Air Marshals.
Mhm.
So right after 9/11, I was the point man at going down to Federal Air Marshal headquarters, and let's put it this way. I know a little bit of something about aviation and airplane construction and this kind of stuff. And the guy in charge was former Secret Service. At that point in time, the Secret Service had 229 357s. And I suggested that probably the 9mm, they had 50 FAMs at that point in time. They all carried 225s. And I suggested that maybe an upgrade to a 228 or a 229 9mm would probably be a very good way of doing things. And this guy was a former Marine lieutenant colonel. And he absolutely, I mean, it was like, there will be no 9mm in my service. Like, okay, I got you covered.
Yes, sir.
So now we were looking at the Federal Flight Deck Officer program, and would it make sense to you, maybe that the guys driving the plane had the same gun and same ammunition and same stuff as the guys back behind the bulkhead, keeping the natives at bay?
Yeah.
Oh, hell no. 40 caliber H and K. That's and that was pure personality at a federal law enforcement training center. That was all that was. And we talked about, penetrative capabilities of this, that, and the other. And, everybody had his mind made up. And I'm like, I did some demonstrations on, shooting through bulkheads behind the crew cabin or the cockpit, flight deck. They got this armored door, but they got nothing but particle board on either side of the door. And if the guys in the back start shooting towards the front, there's nothing to stop the bullets but that particle board between the brain bucket of the guy driving the ship, the guy in the left seat and the guy in the right seat, the first officer. They had no protection at all. There was no, in most aircraft, they various differences, but you had the galley on one side, which had a little bit more metal in it, than
Mhm.
the facility, toilet facility on the other. Uh, but didn't want to hear that.
Yeah.
Wasn't interested. And I'm like, well, yeah, and I know a little bit about hydraulics and airplanes, and you've got redundant systems and all that kind
Mhm.
of stuff, but you definitely don't want to shoot through the floor. You'd rather shoot through the wall than you would the floor.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
like, why wouldn't we use some sort of frangible ammunition, something that was a little kinder to the interior of the airplane?
Mm.
Nobody wanted to hear any of that at all. So I'm like, hey, one of my deals when I'd always go to customers is real
Mhm.
simple. I'd tell them what I thought they needed, and then they would tell me what they wanted, and I would tell the salespeople, this is what they want, sell it to them.
Yep.
I mean,
Mhm.
I don't walk in their shoes, even though I may be a little smarter in ballistics or guns or
Mhm.
whatever else than they know what they want.
Yep.
And by golly, we'll take care of you. And the other
Yep.
part of it is once they realize they're wrong, they may come back and buy what you wanted them to have in the first place.
Yep.
So,
If they realize they're wrong.
well, that's happens. That's happened sometimes,
Yeah.
and people, egos get in the way sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're man enough to say, you know what, we think
Yeah.
we'll go in a different direction. So there we are.
Yeah.
We've been talking for 2 hours almost.
Getting close to it. Getting close to it. Is there anything you would like to talk about that I did not ask you about?
Uh, we could probably talk another 2 hours, and maybe
Okay.
maybe we'll
We'll do another episode.
get online some other time and talk.
Sure.
My whole interest in life at this point in time is doing
Mhm.
something that'll help people
Sure.
shorten the learning curve and do stuff that makes sense. And if it's safe and
Mhm.
socially acceptable, I'm all for it.
Sure. How can people get in touch with you?
Uh, well, um, it- how can people get in touch with me? Probably go on my website and go in that direction.
Mhm.
I it, just the reason I'm hedging a little bit is
Sure.
I've retired 3 times, desperate, and I'm desperately trying to make it number 4.
Sure.
And unless in listening to Spalding the other day, he's talking,
Sure.
he's not completely out of it.
Right.
I do some selected things for, people I've worked with for years and
Mm.
years and years. I don't need or want any business.
Sure.
I I'm always happy to help somebody. Um, but to be real honest with you, I just soon not teach any more classes, and
Okay.
the legal work, that's all fun. It's very lucrative, but
Mhm.
I don't solicit it, and to be honest with you, if somebody wanted to talk to me about, uh, let's say you're going to retire one day, and then you're going to
Mhm.
be looking around like, what am I going to do? And you may have your business, but there are other things that you can do, and then
Mhm.
you get into how much do I need to charge? And the answer to the question is you charge more and more and more until your business drops off, and then you realize what you're worth.
There you go.
And if I told you what I charged per hour, you would like, holy cow, I can't believe this. So, you know, I'm a little greedy sometimes. Sometimes I just can't turn these things down, but so people want to get a hold of me. Phone number and email address is on the website, International Firearms Consultants LLC. Um, don't expect something to come right back instantly. I look at the computer every couple of days. I have a range in the backyard that I like to get on and use. I've got a full steel range. I've got 250 yards for long range stuff. I've got shotgun patterning boards. I've got all kinds of really cool stuff that I haven't been able to use, and now I'm going to wear it out. So that's pretty much the deal. One thing I guess I'd be remiss in not discussing. I do have a presence with the USCCA, United States Concealed Carry Association, and I've got a book that'll be out probably in less than a month that can be picked up through USCCA, and it's basically nothing but marksmanship diagnostics. The brain, the eye, the various things. It's you can take it wherever you want to go, but it's mostly what we've talked about in the past couple of hours. So
Sure.
They paid me a flat fee for it. I don't get any money, don't care. I think it's a pretty good piece of work. It's not perfect. We'll write it again in another couple of years if I'm still interested and able. And there we go. So
All right.
look, I appreciate the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to have an opportunity to connect with the rest of the world, and I'm truly blessed. My whole life has been blessed, and I'm glad that I got to talk with you, and we can thank John Hearn for all that. So
Well, thank you. And next time I see John, I'm going to conduct an experiment. I'm going to ball up pieces of paper and I'm going to throw them at his nose to see if he can not avoid them.
yeah,
And I'm going to dare him that he can't move.
yeah. And he's the guy.
That's right.
He's the guy that would validate that. So
He'll have to do it in the name of science.
Of course. Well, I mean, that's the kind of guy he is. I mean, that was one of the things when I read about him that attracted me to give him a call. He was from Virginia, so that was one strike against him right there. And then when I saw some of the stuff and some of his teaching methodologies and that kind of stuff, I understand he carries all kinds of like a trailer, a truck full of stuff. He'll eventually learn that that's not necessary. And I told him when I was talking with him the other day, my oldest son's the same age as he is, and he was a slow learner too. But anyhow.
Oh, that tickles me. That absolutely tickles me.
Well, I can really resonate with, I used to carry, I mean, I was like the pots and pans salesman, across the prairie out west. I had every possible known to man. Like, wait a minute, we don't need this. And one instance that I had this agency, and we were in Florida, and we were out in the middle of nowhere, like 30 miles from the station. And I said, who brought the targets? And everybody's like, who was supposed to bring the targets? They didn't have any freaking targets. I said, has anybody got garbage bags? Well, lo and behold, somebody had garbage bags. So we, rather than drive 30 miles back to get targets, we hung garbage bags, and we did bullet hole drills and that kind of stuff on the garbage bags. And we had some really meaningful training, and they were like flabbergasted. So, field expedience, it all works.
Years ago, John and I went to a Spalding class, and Tom Givens went with us.
Sure.
And Tom Givens went with us.
Yeah.
And
really good guy, by the way. Think very highly of him.
And I paid attention to how Spalding travels to his classes, and John didn't, because John has that pickup truck full of things, and I fly to classes now with a thumb drive.
Right. I mean, when I do some classes out west, for some of my selected friends and that kind of stuff, same thing. Thumb drive. I carry a handgun and some ammunition, because I may need to shoot something, and but usually it's a 226 and 50 rounds of ammo, and that's
Yeah.
that's what I've got, unless I'm doing a rifle class or something like that. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, thumb drives. I'm basically lazy, so I tell people all the time, I use my brain to save my ass and
Yeah.
my back, or whatever, and so anyhow, all right. Well, we could go on forever, and
Sure.
and listen. I mean, I'm willing to do it if you're willing to have me. We'll do it some other
Yeah.
time.
Absolutely.
And if you
Absolutely.
want to do a round robin with
Mm.
I don't know whether you do that or not, or whether you could even control
Sure.
it or not. But if you had you and me and Spalding and Hearn and maybe Givens, whatever, I mean, it'd be like running a three-ring circus. But I'd certainly be open for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
we'll get that underway.
Yep. One thing
Yeah.
I do, I keep saying one thing.
Sure.
I tell all of my instructors, and this is a serious thing I'll leave you with.
Mhm.
And I did this 20 years ago for a specific reason. I won't get into all that, but it's like you're always on stage as an instructor. People look up to you.
Mhm.
People look to you for information. People look to you for guidance. People look at how you dress, how you act, the words you use. So act like it, because you're always on stage, whether you know it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I try to live that. I'm not always perfect with it, but I really try to live that. And I
Yeah.
encourage all the instructors, because, I, like others, have had people call me up and said, you saved my life, what you did, what
Yeah.
you said. And you never know, and you never know which
Yeah.
ones, that you'll never hear from,
Right.
but you're always on stage. All right, with that, thanks a lot for having me, and let's do it again. That's fun.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, thank you for joining us tonight, and to the audience. We know that your most important asset is your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with us.